Imagine you are standing on a perfectly manicured lawn in Princeton, New Jersey. The air is thick with the scent of cut grass and old money. Before you rises a structure of impossible grace and startling incongruity. It is a palace, not a mansion, not an estate house in the American style, but a true European palace, crafted from luminous French limestone, with a colonnaded portico that speaks not of the New World, but of Warsaw or St. Petersburg in the 18th century. This is Jasna Polana, and it should not be here. This building is an act of architectural schizophrenia. It is a memory of a lost world, a dream of aristocratic splendor, dropped into the heart of a nation that was founded on the rejection of that very idea. It is too grand, too formal, too European for its surroundings. It feels less like it was built and more like it was teleported, a slice of a forgotten empire appearing overnight in the American suburbs. Who would dare to build such a thing? What kind of ambition, what kind of desperation fuels the creation of a private Versailles in the shadow of an Ivy League university? What secrets are held within these stone walls, which were designed not for comfort, but for awe? This is not just a story about a house. It is a story about the collision of two worlds, of unimaginable wealth and profound loss. It is a tragedy of identity, a war for legitimacy fought with marble and masterpieces. And it begins, as all such stories do, with the people who willed it into existence. The story has two authors. One provided the ink, the other the narrative. The first was John Seward Johnson I. He was a man born into a kingdom he did not build and did not know how to rule. He was the son of Robert Wood Johnson, one of the three brothers who founded the global empire of Johnson & Johnson. Seward, as he was known, was royalty of a distinctly American kind, industrial royalty. He inherited a fortune so vast, it was more like a geographic feature than a sum of money. But he did not inherit the respect of the dynasty. He was considered the quiet one, the dreamer, the black sheep. While his brothers steered the corporate behemoth, Seward drifted. He was a yachtsman, a gentleman farmer, an amateur oceanographer. He was a man searching for a purpose that his own last name seemed to deny him. He was born in 1895 into the Gilded Age, a time when wealth was a blunt instrument. He grew up surrounded by the quiet hum of immense, effortless power. Yet for him, it was never effortless. He lived in the shadow of a colossal family name, a name that was on every medicine cabinet in the nation, but one that he felt he had not earned. He went through 2 marriages, had 6 children, and lived the life expected of him. He had the houses, the boats, the staff, but there was a hollowness to it, a sense of being a supporting character in the story of his own family. He was an heir, but not a successor. He was wealthy, but not powerful in the way his family understood power. He was a man drowning in an ocean of privilege, looking for a shore. By the late 1960s, he was an old man, rattling around his New Jersey estate, a lonely king in a silent castle. And then she arrived. The second author of Jasna Polana was a woman whose life was the polar opposite of Seward Johnson's. Her name was Barbara Piasecka. She was born in 1937 in a Poland that would soon cease to exist, swallowed by the twin horrors of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. Where Seward's childhood was a soft, predictable progression of privilege, hers was a brutal education in scarcity, fear, and survival. She grew up with the rubble of Warsaw as her backdrop, a city systematically annihilated, its history erased. She lived under the gray, oppressive boot of communism, a system designed to stamp out the very idea of the individual, of ambition, of grandeur. She was not from a family of peasants. Her family had been land-owning gentry, a part of the Polish aristocracy that was systematically dismantled and dispossessed after the war. So in her blood, there was a memory of another world, a world of culture, art, and status that had been stolen from her. This loss became the central, motivating force of her entire existence. She was brilliant, fiercely intelligent, and possessed of a will forged in the fires of historical catastrophe. She earned a degree in art history from the University of Wrocław, studying the masterworks of a European culture that seemed a universe away from the grim reality of the Eastern Bloc. She knew she had to escape. Poland was a cage, and she was not meant for a cage. In 1968, with little more than $100 and a will of iron, she fled. She made her way to the United States, the land of mythic opportunity. But opportunity does not simply greet you at the shore. She was an immigrant with a thick accent and a degree that was useless without connections. She was an art historian who had to find work as a cook and a chambermaid. It was in this capacity, in 1968, that she was hired at the estate of John Seward Johnson I, the 73-year-old billionaire and the 31-year-old Polish refugee, the man who had everything but a purpose, and the woman who had nothing but a purpose. Their union was a cataclysm. For the Johnson family, it was the ultimate nightmare. They saw a conniving gold digger, a foreign schemer preying on a lonely old man. For Princeton society, it was a scandal to be whispered about over cocktails, the Polish maid and the aging patriarch, but they saw none of that. Seward, for the first time in his life, found someone who was not interested in the Johnson & Johnson boardroom. He found a woman of fierce intellect who could talk to him about art, about history, about a world of ideas far removed from his family's corporate concerns. She was vibrant, demanding, and utterly alive. She did not treat him with the careful deference of an heir, but with the passionate engagement of an equal. She awakened something in him, and for Barbara, whom he called Basia, Seward was not just a wealthy man. He was the means. He was the instrument through which she could not only achieve security, but through which she could rebuild the world that had been stolen from her. He was her Medici, and she would be his artistic visionary. Their relationship was a merger of his near-infinite resources and her near-infinite ambition. Less than a year after she was hired as a maid, she had become the curator of his art collection. 3 years after they met, in 1971, Seward Johnson divorced his second wife and married her. He was 76. She was 34. The war had begun. The marriage was an immediate declaration of independence for Seward and a declaration of intent for Basia. He was finally doing something that was entirely his own, something that shocked and horrified the family that had always defined him. She was now the mistress of a great fortune with the power to give her abstract dreams a physical form. And she had one singular, all-consuming dream. She would not simply live in one of Seward's existing houses. Those houses belonged to his past, to his other life. They were stained with the approval of a society that now scorned her. She would build her own world, a world on her terms. This was the conception of Jasna Polana. It was never intended to be just a home. It was a tool, a stage, and a fortress. It was to be a physical manifestation of her identity, an identity she was creating from scratch. She was no longer Barbara Piasecka, the immigrant maid. She was Barbara Piasecka Johnson, a patron of the arts, a connoisseur, a lady of a great house. The house would be her co-conspirator in this transformation. It would be a filter, designed to keep the hostile world out and to admit only those who recognized her new station. It would be a weapon in her social war, a statement of cultural superiority aimed directly at the American establishment that viewed her as a vulgar usurper. The choice of architecture was the first shot in this war. She did not want a sprawling New England colonial or a red brick Georgian manor, the preferred style of the American aristocracy. That was their language. She would speak her own. She chose the language of her lost homeland. Polish neoclassicism, the style of the last king of Poland, Stanisław August Poniatowski. It was a direct, unambiguous claim to a European aristocratic heritage. The house was designed by a Polish-American architect, Wallace Harrison, though it was Basia who was the true architect, the driving, obsessive force behind every single detail. The name itself was a stroke of genius. Jasna Polana, or Bright Glade, was the name of Leo Tolstoy's estate. It was an immediate claim to a lineage not of money, but of high culture. The psychology of the building was a direct reflection of her own. Its exterior is a model of control, symmetry, and order. The gleaming limestone, the rigid columns, the perfect proportions. It is the architecture of a mind that craves absolute command over its environment, the mind of someone who had lived through chaos and would now impose an unshakable order. Inside, the plan was not for domestic life. It was for presentation. A grand rotunda with a soaring ceiling greeted visitors, designed to inspire awe, not welcome. Long, gallery-like hallways were built to display the magnificent art collection they were acquiring. Rooms were vast, formal, and cold, spaces for receiving dignitaries, not for quiet family life. The house was a museum for 2 inhabitants, a stage for a performance of grandeur. The scale of the project was staggering. Construction began in the early 1970s and cost an estimated $30 million, a figure that would be hundreds of millions today. It was an undertaking on the level of the great Gilded Age magnates a century earlier. Basia's obsession with authenticity was absolute. Limestone was imported from France. Craftsmen were brought in from Europe to ensure every detail of the carving and plasterwork was correct. She oversaw everything, a general directing a campaign. This was not just construction, it was an act of summoning. She was summoning the spirit of a lost world, stone by stone, and commanding it to reappear in the New Jersey soil. The most telling feature of the estate is its fundamental contrast. It is a house built for a dynasty, yet it was built for a childless couple in their twilight years. It is a palace designed for a vibrant court life, yet it was a deeply private, almost hermetic sanctuary. This was its central paradox. It was an exercise in overwhelming public display that was, in reality, for an audience of 2. It was a fortress built to protect them from the world, and like many fortresses, it soon became a prison. The sheer scale of the place was isolating, the formal perfection of its rooms alienating. It was a house that resisted intimacy, that demanded to be admired from a distance. It was the perfect metaphor for the life they were creating, magnificent, art-filled, and profoundly lonely. For a brief shimmering period in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Jasna Polana fulfilled its purpose. It was the golden age. The house stood complete, a triumph of will and wealth. It became the repository for one of the most significant private art collections in the world. Seward and Basia, guided by her expert eye, had been acquiring masterpieces at an astonishing rate. In the silent, cavernous rooms of their New Jersey palace, they hung works by Rembrandt, Raphael, Rubens, Botticelli, and Monet. The house was not merely decorated with art. The art was the soul of the house. To walk through its corridors was to walk through the history of Western civilization. Imagine the sensory experience of that time, the profound silence of the galleries, broken only by the soft echo of footsteps on marble floors. The faint, clean smell of beeswax and old oil paint. Sunlight, filtered through enormous windows, illuminating the face of a 400-year-old Madonna or the shimmering water of a French Impressionist landscape. Chandeliers hung from the ceilings like frozen ice waterfalls. Outside, the grounds were sculpted into a landscape of perfect, geometric beauty, a world where nature itself was brought under the same rigorous control as the limestone walls. It was a self-contained universe, a flawless bubble of curated beauty. This universe did succeed in establishing their power, just not in the way one might expect. The local Princeton elite remained distant, the Johnson family remained hostile. But on the international stage, Jasna Polana made them legends. Curators from the world's greatest museums made pilgrimages there. European scholars and art dealers sought audiences. They had created a court, not of local society, but of the global cultural elite. In this, Basia had triumphed. She had forced the world of high art, the world she had studied as a poor student in communist Poland, to come to her. She was no longer an outsider looking in. She was at the very center, the guardian of treasures, the mistress of a modern-day pity palace. Yet the foreshadowing of the end was always present. The house was a golden cage. Its very perfection was a kind of sterility. It was too large for genuine human connection. The vast, echoing spaces seemed to amplify their isolation. Seward was growing frail, a man in his 80s, a quiet figure moving slowly through his own museum. Basia was the tireless, energetic queen, but her kingdom had only one other subject. They were two people in a space designed for 200. The grandeur that was meant to validate their existence also served to highlight their solitude. The house was a magnificent stage, but the play had only 2 actors, and the final act was drawing near. The perfect world that Basia had constructed was built on a foundation of one man's life, and that life was ending. The inevitable crack in the facade of Jasna Polana was not a social snub or a financial crisis. It was mortality. As the 1980s began, John Seward Johnson's health began to fail. He was diagnosed with cancer. The meticulously controlled environment of the estate, the perfect order of the art and the gardens, was powerless against the chaos of biology. The fortress could keep out unwanted guests, but it could not keep out death. This impending reality activated the one enemy Basia could never truly defeat: Seward's children. For over a decade they had watched from a distance, estranged and resentful, as their father poured his affection and his fortune into his new life with his young wife. They saw their inheritance, not just the money but their father's legacy, being reshaped into a monument for a woman they considered an interloper. As Seward's health worsened, the long, simmering conflict prepared to boil over. The personal tragedy that shattered the Golden Age was Seward Johnson's death on May 23, 1983. He died within the walls of Jasna Polana, the palace he had built for his wife. His death was not an ending, but a trigger. It was the starting gun for what would become one of the most bitter, public, and sensational inheritance battles in American history. The day Seward died, the will was read. He had left almost his entire fortune, an estimated $500 million, to Basia. His 6 children were cut out, left with only the trust funds established for them years before. Instantly, the thematic meaning of the house shifted. It transformed overnight from a house of triumph into the headquarters for a legal war. The elegant, art-filled rooms became strategy centers for lawyers. The silent sanctuary became the epicenter of a media firestorm. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, the 6 Johnson children who sued to have the will invalidated, claiming their father was mentally incompetent, a victim of coercion and undue influence from his wife. On the other, the widow, Barbara Piasecka Johnson, fighting to protect what she believed was her husband's final wish, and by extension, her own life's work. The house was no longer a home or a museum, it was Exhibit A. The fall was not a financial one, but a public one. The trial, which began in 1986, was Basia's ultimate humiliation. The very privacy and control she had sought to build with Jasna Polana were systematically dismantled in a public courtroom. Her entire life was put on trial. The prosecution, representing the children, painted a devastating portrait of her. She was the manipulative foreigner, the screaming, demanding shrew who terrorized her elderly husband and isolated him from his family. Servants were brought to the stand to testify about her rages. Private details of her marriage, of Seward's declining health, were splashed across the front pages of newspapers. The art historian and connoisseur was reduced to a caricature, the Polish maid who had hit the ultimate jackpot. She fought back with the same ferocity that had propelled her out of Poland. Her lawyers argued that Seward was a strong-willed man who knew exactly what he was doing. He had chosen to leave his fortune to the woman he loved, the woman who had brought passion and purpose to his final years, rather than to the children with whom he had always had a difficult relationship. But the damage was done. The trial was a spectacle that lasted for months. It was a brutal, ugly affair that laid bare the dysfunction at the heart of a great American dynasty. In the end, no one truly won. Before a verdict could be reached, the two sides settled. Basia agreed to give the children and a research institute founded by their father roughly $150 million. She was left with over $350 million, making her one of the richest women in the world. She had won the fortune, but she had lost the war for her reputation. The trial had shattered the perfect image she had so carefully constructed. The world would now forever see her through the lens of the accusations, true or not. The golden cage had been broken open, but its inhabitant was now exposed to the world in a way she had never intended. The control she craved was gone, replaced by a notoriety she could never escape. After the trial, the magic of Jasna Polana was gone. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. It was haunted by the ghosts of the legal battle, tainted by the memory of public humiliation and the loss of the man for whom it was built. For Basia, living there was impossible. The monument to her triumph had become a monument to her trauma. She had won the money, but the place itself was lost to her. She did what she had done once before when a world had become unbearable. She left. She packed up her life and her priceless art collection and returned to Europe, settling in Monaco. She left Jasna Polana behind, a magnificent, empty shell on the other side of the ocean. For several years, the great house sat in a state of suspended animation. It was locked up, mothballed, a 50,000-square-foot time capsule of a brief and turbulent reign. The gardens were maintained, the limestone was kept clean, but the soul of the place was gone. The great emptying had occurred. The Rembrandts and Monets were crated up and shipped away. The rooms built to display them were now just vast, vacant spaces. The silence returned, but this time it was not the contemplative silence of a private museum, but the dead silence of a mausoleum. What do you do with a Polish neoclassical palace in the middle of New Jersey? It is a question few are ever forced to ask. The house was too grand, too specific, too monumental to be used as a private home by anyone else. It was a white elephant of incomparable beauty. For years its future was uncertain. It could have been demolished, a fate that met many of the Gilded Age mansions of America. It could have been turned into a university building or a conventional museum. But its fate was to be something far more ironic, a transformation that represented the ultimate posthumous defeat of its creator's original intent. In 1996, the estate was sold. Its new purpose was perhaps the most quintessentially American and therefore most alien function imaginable. This temple of high European culture, this fortress of aristocratic privacy, was to become a golf course, a tournament players club, or TPC, part of the PGA Tour network. The transformation was total. The carefully sculpted formal gardens were bulldozed to make way for fairways and putting greens. The rolling landscape that was meant to evoke an 18th century European estate now had sand traps and water hazards, and the house itself, the great Jasna Polana, became the clubhouse. The irony is almost too perfect to be believed. A building conceived as the ultimate statement of exclusivity became a semi-public commercial enterprise. The Grand Rotunda, designed to awe visiting dignitaries, became a lobby for golfers in polo shirts. The formal dining room, where a lonely couple once ate, surrounded by masterpieces, became a restaurant and a bar. The hushed, gallery-like hallways now echoed with the chatter of members discussing their handicaps. The fortress built to keep the world out now sold memberships to it. It was a repurposing so profound, so contrary to the building's soul, that it feels like a cosmic joke. The house, in its new life, became a symbol of everything its creators had defined themselves against: the casual, corporate leisure culture of modern American affluence. Yet, against all odds, the house survived. Its sheer, uncompromising quality made it too valuable to tear down. Its new function, however ironic, gave it a sustainable purpose. And so it stands today, a strange and beautiful ghost presiding over a world it was never meant to inhabit. It survived the death of its king, the flight of its queen, and the indignity of its transformation. The structure outlived the dream. Today, if you visit the TPC at Jasna Polana, you can see the paradox in its final form. You can have lunch in a room of exquisite neoclassical proportions, looking out over the 18th green. The architecture still whispers of a different world, of Polish kings and priceless art, but the whispers are drowned out by the cheerful noise of its new reality. The house is a living museum, not of art, but of a specific titanic ambition. It is a monument, perfectly preserved, to a dream that failed. The grandeur is still there, but it is a borrowed grandeur, a stage set for a play that closed long ago. It is impossible to tell the story of Jasna Polana without speaking of F. Scott Fitzgerald. Barbara Piasecka Johnson was a real-world Jay Gatsby, and Seward Johnson was her Dan Cody. Like Gatsby, she was an outsider who willed herself into a new identity, fueled by a dream born of loss. She believed that with enough money, she could build a house so magnificent that it would force the world to accept her, that it would make her past irrelevant. She built her colossal mansion not on the shores of Long Island, but in the fields of New Jersey, and filled it not with frantic parties, but with silent, priceless art. Both believed that a structure could rewrite a life. Both built a breathtaking facade to house a lonely heart. And for both, the dream ultimately dissolved, leaving the house behind as the only tangible evidence that it ever existed. This story, though it takes place in a world of unimaginable wealth, connects directly to the anxieties of our own time. What was Basia doing, if not curating the ultimate personal brand? She used architecture, art, and a carefully chosen name to project a flawless image to the world, an image of aristocratic taste, cultural authority, and unassailable status. Is this so different from the way we now use the digital architecture of social media to construct our own perfect facades. We build our own Jasna Polanas post by post, filtering out the messy realities of our lives to present a curated gallery of success and happiness. The human impulse to build a beautiful cage to hide our vulnerabilities is timeless. In the end, what is the legacy of this magnificent, tragic house? It stands as a powerful cautionary tale. It teaches us that you can buy a Rembrandt, but you cannot buy respect. You can build a palace, but you cannot build a home. You can import the aesthetics of an old world, but you cannot import its legitimacy. Jasna Polana is a monument to the flawed belief that external solutions can fix internal problems, that architecture can solve the riddles of the human heart. It was a $30 million answer to the wrong question. The question was never, how can I build a world that will accept me? The question was, how do I accept the world I came from? The final lingering image is of the sun setting behind the great limestone portico. Its long shadow stretches across the perfectly striped fairway of the ninth hole. The house stands silent, impassive, beautiful. It has witnessed a dynastic marriage, the gathering of incredible treasures, a vicious family war, and its own profound transformation. It has outlasted its creators and their passions. It remains a testament not to the triumph of their ambition, but to the indifference of time, which eventually turns every palace into a clubhouse, and every tragedy into a curious story whispered on a summer afternoon. It is a house that time decided to remember, but for all the wrong reasons.